Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Gossips 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Steffi didn't expect anything when she opened the front door to her mother's house. That was the thing about that afternoon. It felt painfully ordinary. No ominous phone call. No frantic text from Ridge. No warning bells going off in her head. Just the soft click of the lock, the familiar scent of eucalyptus and lavender drifting through the air, and the quiet hum of a home she'd known almost her entire life. Taylor's place had always been a sanctuary to Steffi, a refuge during storms that seemed to follow the Forrester name like a curse. It was where Steffi came when the world got too loud, when the family drama pressed in too tight, when she needed her mother's calm voice to ground her. That was why she was there now, nothing dramatic, nothing urgent. She had finished a long meeting at Forrester Creations, her head still buzzing from business decisions and unspoken tension, and she thought she'd stop by to check on Taylor, maybe share a cup of tea, maybe talk about nothing at all. The house was unusually quiet though. Too quiet. Steffi stepped inside and called out, "Mom!" Her voice echoed faintly down the hallway, unanswered. She frowned, setting her bag down on the entry table. Taylor was usually meticulous about schedules, about letting people know where she was. Steffi noticed the lights were on in the living room, the curtains half open, the late afternoon sun slanting across the hardwood floors. A mug sat on the coffee table, cold and untouched, like it had been forgotten mid-thought. That was the first strange detail. Taylor never left a mug unfinished. Steffi moved farther into the house, her heels clicking softly, an unease beginning to coil low in her stomach. "Mom!" she called again, louder this time. Still nothing. The silence felt heavier now, pressing in on her ears. She glanced toward the kitchen and saw another sign that didn't make sense. Taylor's phone lay face down on the counter. Her phone. Taylor never went anywhere without it, especially not in recent months, not with everything the family had been through. Steffi's pulse quickened. She picked it up instinctively, flipping it over. The screen was dark, battery dead. That alone sent a chill through her. Taylor was obsessive about keeping her phone charged. Steffi set it down slowly, her mind racing through possibilities she didn't want to name. She walked toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms, each step heavier than the last, her heart thudding so loudly she was sure she could hear it echo off the walls. As she passed the framed photos lining the hall, pictures of her and Thomas's kids, of Taylor smiling proudly beside Ridge, of happier, simpler days, an odd thought crossed her mind that made her chest tighten. This house felt frozen in time, like something had stopped abruptly and never started again. When she reached the bedroom door, it was slightly ajar. That wasn't unusual on its own, but combined with everything else, it made Steffi's hand tremble as she reached out and pushed it open. The room was dim, the curtains drawn tighter than usual. "Mom!" Steffi whispered now, her voice barely audible, fear creeping into every syllable. Then she saw it. Or rather, she saw her. Taylor was lying on the bed, fully dressed, shoes still on, her body perfectly still. For a split second, Steffi's brain refused to process what her eyes were telling her. It felt unreal, like walking into a scene from someone else's life, someone else's nightmare. Her breath caught in her throat, and she froze in the doorway, unable to move, unable to scream. "Mom!" she said again, this time breaking, the word coming out like a plea. She rushed forward, dropping her bag to the floor, her hands shaking as she reached Taylor's side. "Mom, wake up!" she begged, touching her arm. Her skin felt cold. Not just cool, cold. Steffi's heart slammed painfully against her ribs as panic surged through her. "No, no, no," she whispered, shaking her mother gently at first, then more urgently. Taylor didn't respond. Her eyes were closed, her face pale, her expression eerily calm. Steffi pressed her fingers to Taylor's neck, desperate to find a pulse, praying she was wrong, that this was some kind of misunderstanding, that Taylor had fainted or fallen asleep or anything other than what Steffi's instincts were screaming at her. There was a pulse, but it was faint, frighteningly faint. Relief and terror collided inside her, leaving her dizzy. "Oh my God!" Steffi breathed, tears spilling freely now. She fumbled for her own phone, her hands clumsy, her vision blurred. She dialed 911, her voice cracking as she tried to explain what was happening, where she was, who her mother was. Time stretched and warped as she waited, every second feeling like an eternity. She stayed by Taylor's side, holding her hand, whispering to her, telling her to stay with her, telling her she wasn't allowed to leave, not like this, not without warning. Memories flooded Steffi's mind in jagged fragments. Taylor comforting her after Phoebe's death. Taylor holding her when she thought she'd lost Liam for good. Taylor's steady presence through years of chaos and heartbreak. The idea of losing her mother, of this being the end, felt unbearable, like the ground was giving way beneath her. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, but even that sound didn't break the surreal haze surrounding Steffy. Paramedics burst into the room moments later, their movements efficient and urgent, pushing Steffy gently aside as they assessed Taylor's condition. Steffy stood frozen near the wall, her arms wrapped around herself, watching strangers work on the most important person in her life. One of them asked her questions, how long she'd been like this, if Taylor had any medical conditions, if she'd complained of anything unusual recently, but Steffy struggled to answer. Her mind replayed recent conversations over and over, searching for clues. Taylor had seemed tired lately, yes, but who wouldn't be with everything going on? She'd seemed distant at times, distracted, but again that wasn't unusual. Had she missed something? Had she been too wrapped up in her own life, her own problems, to see that her mother was spiraling or sick or in danger? Guilt clawed at her chest, sharp and relentless. As the paramedics lifted Taylor onto a stretcher, Steffy followed them out of the house in a daze, barely registering the neighbors who had begun to gather, their curious, concerned faces blurring together. She climbed into the ambulance without hesitation, refusing to be separated from her mother. Inside, the space felt cramped and sterile, the beeping monitors a constant reminder of how fragile everything suddenly was. Steffy held Taylor's hand again, her thumb brushing over her mother's knuckles, her voice trembling as she spoke softly to her. "You're going to be okay," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "I'm right here." At the hospital, everything moved at a dizzying pace. Doctors and nurses swarmed around Taylor, wheeling her away from Steffy almost as soon as they arrived. "Please," Steffy pleaded, reaching out instinctively. "That's my mom." A nurse gently assured her they'd do everything they could and guided her to the waiting area. The moment Taylor disappeared through those doors, Steffy felt a profound sense of helplessness wash over her. She sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She called Ridge first, her voice breaking as soon as he answered. "Dad," she said, the word heavy with fear. "Something's wrong." "It's Mom." Ridge arrived at the hospital in record time, his face pale, his usual confidence stripped away by worry. When he saw Steffy, he wrapped her in his arms without a word, holding her tightly as she sobbed against his chest. Thomas arrived soon after, his eyes wide with shock, his voice thick as he asked what happened. Steffy tried to explain, but the words felt inadequate, too small to contain the terror of what she'd seen. Hours passed in agonizing uncertainty. Doctors came and went, offering fragments of information but no clear answers. Taylor had been unconscious when she arrived. Her vitals were unstable. They were running tests. They needed more time. Every update felt like a lifeline and a threat all at once. Steffy sat between her father and her brother, her gaze fixed on the double doors leading to the ICU, jumping every time someone walked through them. She replayed the moment she opened the door to Taylor's bedroom over and over in her mind. The image burned into her memory. The stillness, the coldness, the fear that had paralyzed her. She wondered what would have happened if she hadn't decided to stop by that day. If she'd gone straight home. If she'd gotten caught up in something else. The thought made her feel sick. When the doctor finally approached them with a more detailed update, Steffi's heart pounded so hard she could barely hear him at first. Taylor had suffered a serious medical episode. What exactly was still unclear, but they believed it may have been building for some time. Stress, exhaustion, and underlying issues could have played a role. She was stable for now but still unconscious. The next 24 hours would be critical. Steffy nodded numbly, tears streaming down her face. Stable. Unconscious. Critical. None of those words offered comfort. They were allowed to see Taylor briefly, one at a time. When it was Steffi's turn, she walked into the ICU room slowly, her heart aching at the sight of her mother surrounded by machines, tubes, and monitors. Taylor looked so small in the hospital bed, so vulnerable. Steffy pulled up a chair and took her hand, pressing her forehead against it as she cried quietly. "I'm here, Mom," she whispered. "You scared me. You really scared me." She talked to her mother about everything and nothing, about the kids, about work, about memories from when she was little, hoping, praying that Taylor could hear her. As she sat there, one thought kept repeating in her mind, heavy and unrelenting. Nothing is ever guaranteed. No warning. No preparation. Just one ordinary day that turned into a nightmare. When Steffi finally left the room, she felt changed, like something fundamental inside her had shifted. The image of walking into Taylor's home and finding the unthinkable would stay with her forever. It was a reminder of how fragile life was, how quickly everything could change, and how close she had come to losing her mother without ever getting a chance to say goodbye. And as she rejoined her family in the waiting room, Steffi knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever happened next, nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. Steffi didn't sleep that night. Even when her body begged for rest, her mind refused to shut down. The hospital waiting room became her world. Its harsh fluorescent lights, the faint smell of antiseptic, the constant shuffle of nurses' shoes against polished floors. Every sound felt amplified, every second stretched thin. She sat curled up in a chair, arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing in particular while her thoughts spun in relentless circles. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in Taylor's bedroom. Back to that moment when time seemed to stop, when her heart dropped into her stomach and refused to climb back out. Ridge dozed fitfully beside her, his head resting against the wall, his jaw clenched even in sleep. Thomas paced, unable to sit still, running a hand through his hair over and over like the motion might somehow ground him. No one talked much. Words felt useless, fragile things that might shatter if spoken too loudly. When dawn finally crept through the hospital windows, Steffi barely noticed. The sky outside shifted from deep black to a muted gray, the promise of a new day feeling cruel rather than comforting. How could the world keep moving when her mother lay unconscious just a few rooms away? A nurse approached them quietly, her expression gentle but serious, and informed them that Taylor's condition remained stable. Stable again. That word had started to feel hollow, like a placeholder for truths no one was ready to voice. They were told Taylor hadn't regained consciousness yet, that the doctors were still waiting on test results. There were possibilities, theories, cautious explanations, but nothing definitive. Steffi nodded, thanked the nurse, and sank back into her chair. She wondered how many times a person could hear the same vague reassurance before it stopped meaning anything at all. As the morning wore on, the hospital began to fill with more people. Patients, families, staff, life unfolding around them in a way that felt surreal. Brooke arrived first, her eyes already red when she spotted Steffi. She crossed the room quickly and pulled her into a tight embrace, whispering words of comfort that Steffi barely registered. Soon after, Hope came, then Liam, both of them visibly shaken. Hope held Steffi's hand, squeezing it gently, her voice soft as she said, "She's strong. Taylor's always been strong." Steffi wanted to believe that. She had built her entire sense of security around that belief, that her mother was unbreakable, that no matter what happened, Taylor would always be there. Seeing her like this had shattered that illusion completely. As the hours passed, Steffi found herself replaying recent conversations with Taylor, searching desperately for signs she might have missed. Taylor had been quieter lately, more introspective. She'd talked about feeling tired, not physically but emotionally. She'd spoken about carrying the weight of decades of family trauma, about feeling like she was constantly bracing for the next disaster. At the time, Steffi had brushed it off as understandable stress. Now, guilt gnawed at her relentlessly. Had her mother been asking for help in the only way she knew how? Had Steffi been too busy, too distracted, too confident that Taylor could handle anything? The questions tormented her, offering no answers, only regret. By midday, Ridge insisted Steffi go get some air, if only for a few minutes. She resisted at first, terrified of leaving the hospital even briefly, as if her absence might somehow make things worse. Eventually, she relented and stepped outside into the parking area. The California sun felt harsh against her skin, too bright, too normal. She leaned against a concrete pillar and took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. Her phone buzzed with messages she hadn't answered. Work emails, concerned texts from friends, notifications that suddenly felt trivial and intrusive. She ignored them all. Right now, the only thing that mattered was Taylor. Back inside, a doctor finally approached with more concrete information. Taylor had suffered a severe neurological event, possibly stress-induced, possibly tied to an undiagnosed condition. They were still determining the exact cause, but the damage was significant. Recovery, if it came, would not be quick or easy. There was a chance Taylor might wake up soon. There was also a chance she wouldn't. The doctor was careful, compassionate, measured. Steffy clung to every word, even as they blurred together. When he finished speaking, a heavy silence settled over the group. Ridge's face crumpled, the confident patriarch replaced by a man who looked utterly lost. Thomas stared at the floor, his fists clenched. Steffy felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Later that afternoon, Steffy sat alone in Taylor's room again. The steady beep of the heart monitor had become both comforting and terrifying. A reminder that her mother was still there, but also how close she was to slipping away. Steffy talked to her again, her voice low and raw. She told Taylor about the kids, about how Kelly had asked when Grandma was coming over again, about how Hayes had drawn her a picture just the week before. She laughed softly through tears as she shared these details, hoping the sound of her voice might reach Taylor somewhere deep inside. "You have to wake up," Steffy whispered. "You're not done yet. We're not done yet." That night, as darkness fell again, the hospital felt even more oppressive. Shadows stretched across the walls, and exhaustion weighed heavily on everyone. Ridge finally went home to shower and change, promising to return in the morning. Thomas left reluctantly, needing to check on Douglas. Steffy stayed. She couldn't bring herself to leave, even when a nurse gently suggested she get some rest. She curled up in the chair by Taylor's bed, her head resting against the mattress, holding her mother's hand as if letting go might make this all too real. Sometime in the early hours of the morning something changed. Steffy didn't notice it at first. Only a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, a sense of tension snapping into focus. The monitor beeped differently. Taylor's fingers twitched. Steffy's head snapped up, her heart racing. "Mom," she whispered, leaning forward. Taylor's eyelids fluttered just barely, like someone struggling to wake from a deep, heavy sleep. Steffy gasped, her breath catching painfully in her chest. "Mom, it's me," she said urgently. "It's Steffy. Can you hear me?" Taylor's eyes opened slightly, unfocused, confused. Her lips parted but no sound came out. Tears streamed down Steffy's face as she pressed the call button, shouting for a nurse. Within seconds the room filled with activity again, doctors and nurses rushing in, checking vitals, asking questions. Steffy was gently guided back as they worked, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear so intense it was almost unbearable. Taylor didn't speak. She didn't fully wake up. But she had responded. She had moved. And that, the doctors said, was a positive sign. When Ridge and Thomas returned and heard the news, their reactions mirrored Steffy's. Relief tempered by caution, hope laced with dread. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a guarantee. But it was something. Over the next few days, Taylor drifted in and out of semi-consciousness. Sometimes her eyes would open briefly. Sometimes she would squeeze Steffy's hand, faintly but unmistakably. Each small response felt monumental, a victory hard-won. Steffy lived for those moments, clinging to them like lifelines. As Taylor slowly began to regain awareness, the emotional weight of the situation deepened. When she finally became lucid enough to understand where she was, fear flickered across her face. She looked around the hospital room, confused and overwhelmed. Steffy was at her side instantly, soothing her, explaining what had happened as gently as she could. Taylor's eyes filled with tears as she listened, her expression a mix of guilt and sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to scare you." Steffy shook her head fiercely, tears spilling over. "Don't ever apologize for this," she said. Just stay. That's all I care about." Recovery was slow and uncertain. Taylor was weak, both physically and emotionally. Doctors recommended extensive rest, therapy, and a complete reevaluation of her lifestyle. Stress, they emphasized, had played a massive role. When Steffy heard that, something hardened inside her. She thought about the endless cycles of drama, betrayal, heartbreak, and chaos that defined their family. She wondered how much of it her mother had quietly absorbed over the years, carrying everyone else's pain on her shoulders. Sitting by Taylor's bed one evening, Steffy made a silent vow. Things had to change. She couldn't control everything, but she could protect her mother from being pulled back into the center of every storm. As Taylor grew stronger, difficult conversations began to surface. She admitted she'd been feeling overwhelmed for a long time. Emotionally exhausted, haunted by the past, terrified of repeating old patterns. She confessed that the day Steffy found her, she'd been trying to rest, to shut everything out, but her body had simply given up. Hearing that broke Steffy's heart all over again. She realized how close she'd come to losing her mother, not to some dramatic accident or villainous scheme, but to something quieter and far more insidious: accumulated pain. When Taylor was finally discharged from the hospital, Steffy insisted she move in with her, at least temporarily. Taylor protested at first, not wanting to be a burden, but Steffy wouldn't hear it. "You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else," she said firmly. "Now it's our turn to take care of you." Rich supported the decision, visibly relieved to know Taylor wouldn't be alone. The transition wasn't easy. Taylor struggled with feelings of vulnerability and loss of independence, while Steffy struggled with constant fear. Every cough, every moment of fatigue sending her heart racing. But slowly, gradually they found a rhythm. Life didn't magically become peaceful. Old tensions still simmered, new challenges still arose. But something fundamental had shifted. Steffy approached everything with a heightened awareness of what truly mattered. Work took a back seat when it needed to. Arguments felt less important. Time became precious in a way it hadn't before. One evening, as Steffy sat with Taylor on the patio, watching the sunset, Taylor reached for her hand and squeezed it. "Thank you for finding me," she said quietly. Steffy swallowed hard, emotion clogging her throat. "I'll always find you," she replied. The memory of walking into Taylor's home and finding the unthinkable never left Steffy. It lingered like a scar, painful, permanent, but also a reminder. A reminder to cherish the people she loved, to listen more closely, to never assume there would always be another day. No warning, no preparation, just the fragile reality of life, hanging by a thread. And for Steffy Forrester, that truth would shape everything she did from that moment on.